As Camden's life hangs by a thread due to an unknown magical disease, Kalai and her family must delve into ancient genealogical records to uncover the secret behind his condition and race against time to find a way to save him. Join us to tame the wildest dragons. Let's get those subscriptions rolling. Chapter 17. Just as Cadence had instructed, I hadn't sparred for a couple of days, but that didn't stop me from helping around the village. Camden and I worked with Spence and Kainon to rebuild the Dragonling path. My brothers helped out when they could as well, tired of the Dragonlings tearing up our yard. Elazar and their mothers tried their best to keep the young dragons in order, but they were getting riled up, stuck in a small space for a few days. They'd recently discovered if they flew, they had full reign over where they went. All I could ask for was that the mothers kept the dragonlings away from the house. It was my one sanctuary away from the crumbling village. Thankfully, the repairs were going well. Most families had a roof over their head again. Only the ones whose houses completely burned down still had no place to call home. They'd been living with other families in the meantime. I was in the middle of holding two joists over my head, ignoring the angry throb in my side, while Spence hammered everything into place, when I caught sight of a star-white blonde head making her way over. Spence finished up and I groaned in relief as my hands dropped to my sides. The weather had been on our side since the attack, the sun high, with only a few clouds to stand between us and its warmth. Today was particularly hot out, and a vicious sweat worked on my back. Cadence wasn't sweating at all in her light green dress. It must have been a new dress because I'd never seen her wear an ounce of green in her life. She stuck to blues and grays to match her eye. Her hair was smooth and shimmery in the sunlight. I might have mistaken her for a princess. She looked so gorgeous today. She grimaced at my sweaty, filthy state, then looked around the nearly complete path. It was just the top of the cage that had to be closed off. At the rate we're going, the dragonlings could spend the night in here. Where's the prince? She asked. It was always the first thing she said when she stopped by to check up on me. What really happened, though, was that she changed my bandages and, without looking me over, declare I was fine. Then she'd find Camden and talk to him for hours while I recovered. Reluctantly, I pointed to the top of the cage where Camden and Kyan had climbed to close the hole off on the top. It was a solid 50 feet and as precarious as it looked from down here, she gasped. What's he doing up there? He can't fall. He's a prince, you know. What if he dies? I rolled my eyes. Normally I would be up there, but since you haven't cleared me for intense physical activities, he volunteered to go up there. Relax, I added to her horrified expression. He's wearing a harness. It'll catch him if he falls. She glared at me as if I'd somehow coaxed the prince to climb to deadly height. When will he be done? I want to go for a walk. I don't know. I lied. From the looks of it, he was nearly finished hammering the planking plate. He and Kylan should be down any minute. So it was time I got rid of Cadence before she dug her talons in him. We put his training on hold too long. I wanted to at least do something productive with him today. Also, the idea of him taking a gallant stroll through the meadow with Cadence didn't sit right with me. Aren't you supposed to change my bandages or something? I said it to annoy her more than anything. I honestly didn't care if she healed me today. I just wanted to get rid of her. She sighed irritably and dug through her satchel.
Yes, fine.
All right, where can we do it?
I gestured to the shed beside the pen, where we stored toys and equipment for the dragonling.
She followed me inside and instructed me to take my top off. It would have been easier before Amelia had hemmed my shirts to fit me properly, but I looked too good to care how much it hurt to take them off. The bruises had gone down to a light blue and had shrunk to half their size. It made another scars visible again, and Cadence grimaced at the stab wound where a horn had caught my hip before she lathered up the bandages in the wart root paste. Ignoring her looks of disgust, I lifted my arms above my head and let her wrap my torso. When she was done, she sat down on the bench opposite me, back stiff, while she flicked sawdust off her skirt. We made our cuts for the planks in here The floor was littered with cut-off pieces and sawdust. Can you let me know when the prince is done? I'm going to stay in here so the sun won't ruin my skin before our walk, I snorted. I told you, I don't know when he'll be done. It could be hours. I watched her eye twitch at the thought of being cooped up in a dusty shed for hours while she awaited her prince. Was it really worth it? That's fine. I don't mind shit. Apparently, it was the sex that good. What else could they be doing when they disappear? Camden had already made it clear he didn't like talking to her, and she definitely didn't spoil. What other option was that? Before I could think of something else to spur her away, the sheet door opened, and Camden walked in, shirt wrapped around his waist. His body was glistening with sweat, beads rolling down his chest, and the valleys of his washboard. He smiled at me, brushing his damp hair out of his eyes, and looked dirty, blonde. His hair was so wet. Good news, Spence and Kyan said they can finish up the pen by themselves. We have the afternoon to ourselves. Honestly, though, I think Kyston wants to get rid of me. I'm making him feel bad for not having a sexy body like mine. He winked at me. I know you can't spar yet, but can you fly? I'd love to get off the ground for a bit. Before I could open my mouth to tell him the plans I had in store for him, Cadence shoved me aside in her rush to stand by him and slip her hand into his. I was actually hoping we could go for a walk, Prince, just you and me. She held his gaze under her seductive lashes. Great. At this rate, he's going to be stuck here forever. He'll marry Cadence and never have any time to find his dragon partner. Camden tiptoed around her and came to my side. I'm going to spend the afternoons colliding. We have a lot to catch up on. Is she okay to fly? She crossed her arms and glared at me. No, she can't fly. She's not strong enough. Camden looked down at me, a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. Well, I'll just fly with you then. I can hold both of us. Cadence looked like she wanted to protest, but Camden was already heading out that she had decided. I caught up to him, leaving Cadence to gape in the shed. We walked down Main Street, following it through the middle of town. Vendors and shops were finally reopening and calling out to us to buy their latest product. I thought you might have wanted to go for a walk with her, I confessed once we passed the busier part of town, surprising myself at how unsure I sounded. He laughed, an unattractive, curt noise at the back of his throat. What? So she can feel me up and try to take my clothes off the entire time. No, thank you. No. Well, you're already halfway there, I teased, finding my confidence again. He peered down at his naked torso and shrugged. A few women we passed by took notice and giggled to each other. It wasn't unusual for men to walk through town with a bare chest, but none of them were quite as striking.
Yeah.
Camden's. I tried not to think about it or stare like everyone else. He grinned at the giggling lady. If my mother found out I strutted downtown without a shirt, she'd have my head. He laughed. Really? Oh, yeah. It's not all fun being a prince. You know, we have so many rules to follow. I can't wait to get my own dragon. I can fly around and be free to do what I want in the sky. But don't you get everything you want? Weapons, clothes, women. Why did I even bring women up? Stupid mouth. I didn't want to know about the women he'd been with. I do, he said slowly, awkwardly. But I never know if someone is with me. Because I'm Prince Camden, a dragon prince, or if they're with me because they want to be with me. Quote. That's why I like you. You couldn't give two shits who I am. You made that very clear to my balls. When we first met, I gasped mockingly. You like me? I thought I was boorish. He pushed me gently. You'll never let that go, will you? Not as long as it bothers you. I admitted, pushing him back. The first thing I'm ordering my dragon to do is eat you. He wouldn't. Dragons love me. Besides, I don't think you have it in you to kill me.
Well, who else is going to tell you you're doing stuff wrong?
Oh, my brothers have no qualms against that. But they're not here. I poked his chest. I am. He grinned. The look suited him. Wow. It added a youthful mischievous to his features instead of the brooding maturity he held often on his shoulders. My eyes couldn't help but trail down to the curvature of his lips. I yanked my eyes away. It was then when I noticed we had conveniently stopped beside my house. After hastily telling him to wait for me outside, I quickly skipped through the front door, hoping no one would be home to see my red cheeks.
The house was empty, everyone out doing their part to repair the village. I took my time going down the stairs of the basement and used it as an opportunity to slap some sense into me.
What was I thinking staring at his mouth like that?
Thoughts of kissing. It would only cause me trouble. I needed to get a grip on this feeling in my stomach before it got out of hand.
It would only lead to heartbreak.
As soon as he found his partner and was all trained up, he would have no use for me and leave and forget this town just as his brothers had.
Stop forgetting it.
I found the bag of dragon vein laying on the workbench beside the knife one of my idiot brothers had forgotten to put in its sheath. After putting the knife away, I grabbed the bag and met Camden outside.
Now dressed in his shirt, he was leaning back on the fence, hands in pockets, as he watched the dragonlings ruin my yard with their play and their mothers supervised. He peeled away from the fence when he saw me, eyes resting on the bag secured to my hip with caution.
What's that for? I patted it softly and winked at him, training.
But I don't have a dragon. I can't use fire magic. He almost seemed insulted that I would even suggest he use fire magic before we found him a dragon.
What you did the other night begs to differ. I want to see what you can do.
I've never heard of an Acker able to use fire magic without a dragon. I want to see what makes you so special.
You might only be able to do certain things then. When you have a dragon, you'll be as strong as your brother.
We won't know until we try. He gave it some thought. What if it was a fluke and we blow up?
Then I guess we'll die.
We wouldn't. I'd make sure of that, play this by the book. But he seemed to do well under pressure. So maybe that would be the push he needed to do what I wanted him to do. And then he could get out of here before my feelings got me into serious trouble. Your faith in me is resounding. He spat dryly. I shrugged.
You're the one who's worried about dying because you don't think you can do fire magic.
With that, I went into our crumbling shed to grab some riding equipment, then continued our walk down the street. With the yard full of dragons, we would have to call for Marco somewhere else. Camden caught up to me, still watching the bag like it was going to explode at any moment. I ignored it and kept my eyes forward. The less I looked at him, the better. Thank the gods he put his shirt back on. It would have made this whole keep it professional thing a lot harder. He grabbed the saddle from me, even though I was doing just fine, pretending my ribs weren't hurting as I held it. He said to my protests, "What kind of gentleman would I be if I let you carry all the heavy stuff?" One that lets a strong, independent woman continue to be her fine self. Rolling his eyes, he dodged my swipe when I tried to reach for the saddle.
You're still injured, Khalil.
I'll let you carry all the saddles you want when your bruises are gone. They almost are. I pulled my shirt up so he could see the faded blue bruises. His eyes went from the blue splotches on my side up to my brow, the rounded pupils dilated despite the bright sun shining down on us. While flashing me is an excellent way for most women to get me to do almost anything for them. It doesn't work on me when you're the one doing it. You're not getting the saddle. Grumbling, I dropped my shirt and pretended not to be bothered that any other women could flash him and he'd do what they wanted. But my body was too hideous to induce such ridiculous actions out of him. Fine, keep the bloody saddle. I tried not to let my mood project in my voice, but considering he flinched at my words, I might have come across harshly. Whatever, the bigger the distance from him, the better. I marched ahead of him into the field and called for Marco. The meadow was bright with color today. Pollen wafted in the air as a breeze swept through the grass. I'd always taken comfort here in the sense, in the serene air surrounding me, the endless view of the enormous mountains that created this valley. Today, right now, it only reminded how alone I was with Camden. No one was around. A lot of people came out here for privacy. Now I was questioning my idea to train in fire magic today. We would have to be even further away from people than this. Anything could happen. No, nothing is going to happen. You're only a friend to him at the most.
You're definitely not going to initiate anything that would be the stupidest thing you can do.
I should have listened to Cadden, I muttered. Maybe then I wouldn't be having this problem. What was that? Camden asked, finally reaching my side.
Marco's here.
Just in time, a large shadow passed over it.
Marco circled the field once before landing in front of me, making the ground shake. Thanks to my training, Camden held his own as a gust of wind blasted through us from Marco's wing. The red dragon approached and made a gurgling noise through his jowls and greeting. Hey, buddy, want to take us to the mines today? The mines, Camden echoed in concern.
Just the base of the mountain, I assured him.
It's the safest place for you to train. It's barren, so the only thing you'll be catching on fire is your own hand. The news appeared to comfort him, and he nodded, then began saddling Marco Pippa. I hopped into the saddle first, Camden jumping behind me quickly. He wrapped one arm around my waist while he leaned forward to hold the handle. I bit my lip, doing my best to ignore the flutter in my stomach. Dear gods, he was so warm, and his arm was so solid against me. Seeming to sense my distress, he dipped his mouth to my ear. Are you okay, Colette? This isn't too tight. Nope. I managed delirious from the breath on my neck. I definitely should have listened to Cotton. Let's go, Marco Camden. Ordered the dragon. Only the dragon merely turned his head to look at me for approval to the mountain Marco. Without hesitation, he thrust his wings and took to the sky. We landed at the base of Mount Lum. Rubble from many explosions further up the mountain littered the ground. It was easy to slip on up the incline, but today we were staying at the bottom. I found a nice boulder to sit on and sifted through the dragon vein in the bag for something the size of my pinky nail, as Giles suggested. The sun was blocked by the looming mountains flanking Mount Lama, and the brisk breeze sent a shiver through me.
Once I found a few pieces for Camden to practice with. I buttoned my jacket up, thankful I'd brought it.
Camden only had his long-sleeved shirt, but he didn't appear to notice the temperature drop as he inspected the tiny stones I'd handed him. Are you sure this is safe? He asked, holding one stone in between his thumb and index finger. He peered over to Marco while the big dragon nestled himself behind me and wound his tail at the base of my bolt. That piece is so small, only an Acker could do something useful with it. It'll only cause a spark when you break it, so you'll have to be quick. Do you know what to do? He stared at the stone, then sighed. I should hope so.
I've read every text in our library on fire magic. Promise me, you'll be all right.
Camden, stop being a pussy and break the damn rock. He took a moment to be taken aback, surprise then, anger flashing over his face. I'm only looking out for you. You're stalling. Get on with it. He had power. I wanted to see how much power we were dealing with, then figure out why a dragon wouldn't bond with him. But sneering at me, he crushed the stone between his fingers. A spark lit up and fizzled. He swirled. That happened faster than I thought it would. Hang on. He took another vein from the pile I placed on a rock near him. He crushed it. The spark flared out of his fingers and turned into a flame no bigger than a candlelight. But the size didn't matter. He did it. He was using fire magic without a dragon. The fire flickered in the wind. It almost blew out, but he sidestepped the breeze and used his magic to make it bigger, the size of his fist. He stared at it in stunned silence. You're doing it. I praised, moving from my perch to investigate the flame. He stepped back, cradling the hand on fire close to his chest. Don't get too close, Kali. I don't know how I'm doing this. Yeah. And I don't want to hurt you. You've got it. I'm fine. I'd never been so sure of my word. He might be afraid of this magic, but he handled it with such ease. There was no unsteady flicker, no roaring flames, only a strong light warming the space between us. He was in far more control than he gave himself credit for. I stepped closer, but he kept backing away until he hit the cliff wall, warning me to stay away. I
went right up to him and grabbed his elbow so he couldn't move away from me. Colin, shut up.
Have faith in yourself for 5 seconds, will you? I didn't get what the big deal was. He'd been eager to learn all there was to being a dragon prince. And now, when it came to learning an essential part of what it meant to be a dragon prince, he was scared to use this power. Look at this, Cam. This is amazing. No one in this world can do what you're doing right now. Enjoy it. Embrace it. But he wasn't looking at the fire floating in his palm. His eyes were on me. I finally pulled mine away from the flame standing between us and gasped. His pupils were slits again. Even in this lighting, the green in them were more vibrant and seemed to glow. Hedda flinched away from me. What is it? I didn't hurt you, did I? There was no possible way he could have hurt me. The fire was a foot away from me. He really had to stop jumping to that conclusion. Marco, come here, I said instead of answering him. The dragon did as requested and rested his head beside us. I studied the beaded, slitted pupil at the center of Marco's eye, then it went back to Camden's eye. They were almost exactly the same, except Camden's eyes were a lighter shade of green. What are you doing, Kalai? Camden asked, concerned. Turn off the flame. Moment later, the fire in his palm fizzled into ashes. I looked at his eyes. They were still slits. Interested. I'd originally thought they would return to normal if he stopped using magic. How do you feel? I asked him. Kalai, tell me what this is about before I do something stupid. Camden demanded. I sighed, crossing my arms. Your eyes look like Marco's. Do your brother's eyes change when they use magic? No. What do you mean? They look like Marco. He bent over to look into the dragon's eyes as if they would reveal all of their secrets. However, once Marco saw his eyes, the dragon growled and backed away from him. When Camden stepped for him, Marco's scales bristled, a fiercer growl rumbling out of his mouth. I grabbed his arm before he pushed Marco too far. The dragon's tail whipped around behind him, throwing rocks into the cliff face and into other rocks. His claws dug into the ground, ready to lunge. What's he doing? Camden asked, slowly backing away from him. I don't know. Marco, what's wrong? I approached the dragon with caution, raising my hand so he knew I wouldn't hurt him. He was the easiest male dragon to tame and was popular in the village because he was known for being so gentle with everyone. This was the most aggravated I'd ever seen him, but we hadn't done anything to annoy him. The dragon snarled eyes on the man behind me. He lowered his head, showing off the horns on his crown, and clawed at the ground. Usually males only did that when they were threatened by other males during mating season. But it wasn't mating season, and there were no other dragons around. This didn't make any sense. Marco, stop it. I should have brought jerky. Except he was supposed to be the only dragon who didn't need to be enticed by jerky. And then he did the unthinkable. He lunged chapter 18. My surprise felt like a slap to the face, and then I didn't have any more time to wonder why Marco was acting this way. I jumped out of the way. He ran straight past me, continuing his charge for Camden. But he was being stupid and growling at the 5-ton dragon like it would make a difference. Move, Cam, I screamed, rushing to my feet. The idiot braced himself for the impact, but I was only a bit faster than the hulking dragon and knocked him to the side. Are you mad? Marco swung his neck around and snapped his jowls at us. Camden rolled us to the side and crouched over me, still snarling like a wild animal. His whole body trembled. I hoped it was in fear because he would have completely lost his mind if he wasn't terrified of the massive dragon trying to kill him. Marco bared his teeth at him, spit spraying us and the rocks on either side of us. I shoved Camden off me and stood in front of the dragon. That's enough. Back off.
Marco.
His mouth split open, about to take me in whole. I dove underneath and bounded for his front leg, quickly climbing up it. I slammed my elbow into the pressure point in the joint between the leg and his torso. The dragon cried out and collapsed to the ground. Run, Cam. I don't know why, but he's mad at you. Camden got to his feet, staring up at the dragon in horror as he snapped at him, dragging his paralyzed leg to get to him. Kalai, can't leave you with him like this. Go, I'll be fine. Marco wasn't trying to buck me off. He was completely fixated on making Camden his lunch. To my relief, He finally started backing away, keeping his eyes on the dragon like how I taught it. While he made his way for the trail, I climbed into the saddle and grabbed my sword. With the hilt of the short sword, I smacked it into the left front leg, rendering the dragon's front legs paralyzed. He whimpered and swung his head back and forth in frustration. Camden ducked out of view down the hill. It appeared to be all what Marco needed to calm down. I slipped down his side and stood in front of the beast, arms crossed. He better know how unimpressed I was with his behavior. What was that, huh? The dragon dragged his head away from my disappointed glare. New huh? Buddy, you don't get to avoid this. I moved in front of him again. Cam has done nothing to you. You don't get to flip out like that for no reason. Was it his eye? He curled his lip up at the mention of the only different thing I could think of. What's wrong with his eyes? He growled. Hey, cut it! He's not dangerous to us. Set the front. He shook his head, apparently disagreeing with that statement. Fine, be that way. If I release you, I want you to go straight home and send Eliasir after us. If you go after Camden again, you won't get any jerky and no breeding next year. God, the dragon didn't make any movements of protest, so I went around to his sides and hit his pressure points with the hilt of my sword. He stretched, shaking his body head to toe, then he took off. Releasing a relieved breath, I followed the trail down the hill. The chilly breeze was suddenly welcomed it, cooled the sweat on my skin. I'd had dragons attack me before, but never one as gentle as Marka. Why would a small change in Camden's appearance make him act like that? He hadn't threatened me, and Marco had seen the other princes use fire magic to know that they were nothing to be afraid of. I turned the corner that led out into the open fields of the valley. The mountains gave way, allowing the sun to shine down over the colorful meadow. It warmed me up instantly, so much so that I had to tie my jacket around my waist. Plum was on the other side of the extensive field. Without a dragon, we would be lucky if we got home before sundown. Thinking of the all-harpies, manticore, and goblins that lived in this valley, that would love an easy snack, made the walk home seem a lot further away. Try not to die until Eleazar finds you. Further down the trail, someone was slumped over and quaking something fierce. It dawned on me that there should only be one person out here. My heart stopped for one beat. 2 beats, and then I ran. Cam was on his hands and knees, shaking like a naked dog in the middle of winter. Sweat trickled down his neck. His entire shirt was drenched. There didn't appear to be any visible injuries. Cam, what happened? He responded with a groan and collapsed. Cam, I shook him to make sure he was awake. He moaned, rolling onto his back. His chest heaved, struggling to catch a breath. Cam, tell me what happened. Did Marco attack you on his way home? It hurts. He panted. What? Does you have to tell me what's going on, or I can't help you? He was so pale, it was like looking at a ray. His hair clung to the side of his face, a shade darker from all the sweat, everything. He curled up, more tremors racking his body. I'd never seen anyone move like this before. His flesh moved as if something was trying to dig its way out. It looked as painful as he said it was. Having no idea what else to do for him, I took his hand and squeezed it tight. All I could do was let him know that he wasn't alone. He took my hand in both of his and pressed his forehead to it, taking deep breaths. The tremor seemed to have subsided a little bit. This may be an unreasonable question, but do you think you can move? Cam, we can't stay here. Marco's gone to get Elisar, but she won't be here for a few hours. It's hours of daylight we can't afford to lose. Grunting, he rolled onto his knees and squeezed his eyes shut for a moment. I rubbed his back, feeling his muscles roil under my touch. I kept it to myself. He had enough things to worry about. He didn't need me adding something might be inside him to it. The healers could have a look at him when we got home. Help me up, he breathed. I grabbed his elbow and pulled him up the best I could. No. Somehow, he felt much heavier than the last time I sparred with him, but
He clearly hadn't gained any weight.
It only added to my fear that he had become the victim of some sort of parasite.
I draped his arm over my shoulders, taking as much weight off him as my ribs could bear as we hobbled down the path. His sweat transferred over to my shirt, instantly soaking it. By gods, he was boiling hot. It was a wonder he hadn't dropped dead from the intense heat his body produced. It almost hurt to touch him. Lead the way, Kalai.
Yeah.
He murmured in my ear. The sun's too bright for my eyes. Don't die on me. Kim, okay? My brothers had been hurt before, and sometimes we weren't sure they were going to make it, but I never felt this scared for someone. At least with my brothers, there was someone around who knew what they were doing, and the chances of them dying were very slim. Camden and I were on our own, and I honestly didn't know if he was going to make it. I didn't even know what the scariest part was, it being my fault that he died, because I was reckless or being in a world without him. He had so much to offer, and he had a truly kind heart under all his walls. He didn't deserve to die. My heart ached at the thought of losing him. He chuckled breathlessly. You make it sound like you care whether I die or not. Of course I care, you idiot.
I'm not heartless, and believe it or not, you've grown on me.
He tilted his head towards me, eyes opening just enough to see me through his lashes.
I thought you were getting tired of me. What would make you think that? I asked, surprised he'd say something like that. You kept pushing me to do fire magic. I thought you were trying to get rid of me. Is that why you didn't want to do it? It dawned on me that he was stalling because he wasn't ready to leave. He nodded, closing his eyes again. I like it here. The people have grown on me.
Yeah, Amber and Cadence have really taken to you too. I admitted miserably.
Man, if they could see him draped over me like this, they'd flip out and call me a whore or whatever they felt like would get him away from me.
Then again, if they saw him like this, they would know exactly what to do to help him. I was more useless than I was the night the manticore attacked the village. You're useless no matter what you do. The one thing I knew couldn't save either of us right now. And now Camp's going to die because of you. I wasn't talking about Cadence and Amber, he mumbled. And then his full weight landed on me. He slipped from my grasp and hit the ground hard, Camp. I fell to my knees beside him and flipped him onto his back. His eyes were closed, his breath shallow and ragged.
I felt his pulse. It was beating at an alarming rate. I didn't need to be a healer to know that.
Cam, wake up. He remained unconscious, aside from the shivers that took over his body again. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If Talon was your guide, this would have never happened. I wish I was stronger for you, or maybe became a healer like my mother. I was a blathering idiot because I didn't know what else to do. Did I ever tell you about her? I never met her, but my brothers talk about her. She was beautiful and fierce. She was the dragon's favorite healer. She could calm any dragon in pain. It's how she met Dad. He was going to put down a dragon because she was too violent. My mother smacked him and talked the dragon down before he could hurt her. She healed the dragon, and the rest is history. Dad said he fell in love with her on the spot. He never met anyone so brave. He misses her so much. He'd never admit it, but I think he sometimes regrets having me. She'd still be alive if it weren't for me. Everyone would be better off if I never existed. You would too. I didn't know when I started to cry, but the next thing I knew, my shoulders were shaking and my face was wet. Calling Camden, raised his hand, reached out blindly for me. I took his hand, thankful he was awake again. Are you crying? No. Why are you crying?
I'm not crying. I hastily wiped my eyes in case he opened his and saw I was lying.
He didn't need to know how upset I was at the thought of losing him. Can you walk? We're losing daylight. Face scrunched in agony. He rolled to his side, then pulled himself up to his hands and knees. I grabbed his arm and helped him up to his feet. He leaned into me, head lolling on my shoulder. What's happening to me? With a grunt, I shifted his weight to take it off my ribs, then half-dragged him down the trail. I don't know, but we'll find out when we get back to Plum. You'll be okay. Cam, I might not be much use, but there are people in the village who know what they're doing. His nose brushed along my neck, breath hot on my skin. You smell different, Kali. He mentioned easily. Yeah, that's sweat. I wouldn't be smelling me if I were you. Like how I'd been gracefully ignoring how much he reeked and how wet he was and how sticky it was on my skin. No, it's lavender. I use a lavender bar of soap in the bath. I hid it in my room so my brothers didn't use it up. It was the one girly thing I had to myself. I didn't mind living in a house full of men, but they could do with smelling better than dirt with their own soap. I had never smelt it before. He sounded like he was accusing me of hiding my scent from him. You must be delirious, better than being in pain. Well, normally I don't carry you across the valley, I grunted, hobbling us around a large rock I couldn't step over with him on top of me, like this. I guess he mumbled. He took a deep breath and hummed in my ear. You smell heavenly. Thanks. It was the strangest compliment I'd received, but I didn't get too many, so I'll take it. He hummed again, this time with a hint of Lagarthy behind it. He started leaning to me again. Cam, I shook him lightly, trying not to fall over. Cam, stay awake. He lifted his head off my shoulder to look at me through his lashes. What's the matter? If you fall asleep, I'm going to drop you. Don't do that. Don't fall asleep. We spent hours dragging our feet on the trail, racing hopelessly against the sun. Whenever I looked up, it was a little bit closer to dipping behind the mountain. My anxiety rose as the shadows grew longer. At this rate, I would be too exhausted to fend off any creatures when they came for us at sundown. The only reprieve the sun going down offered was the temperature falling with it. It made the trek just a little bit easier. Camden was constantly in and out of consciousness. Whenever he passed out, I had to ease him down to the ground. It gave me the chance to catch my breath and stretch and regret not grabbing water from Marco's saddle. When I looked back, the beginning of the trail was still in sight in the distance, gloomily reminding me we hadn't covered as much ground as it felt like we had. But I kept pushing us to go as far as we could before Camden collapsed again. Any distance was better than none. Elizar could get to us that much sooner. His condition neither improved or worsened, and I wasn't sure if I should take solace in that, aside from being grateful he hadn't died yet. The sun's yellow light shifted to orange, shadows blending together. The mountain's shadows on the left loomed over us, casting a chilly air over my skin. For once, I was glad to have Camden's hot, sweaty body draped over me, and the effort of lugging him down the trail kept me comfortably warm. And then the sun dipped. Behind a mountain, a purple hue lit the valley. We only had a few minutes before it went pitch black. I pulled Camden off the trail to the back of a large boulder. That way, when the monsters came, they could only come at us from one direction. I leaned him back against the rock. His head dropped, and he moaned in his struggle to lift his head upright. What are you doing, Kala? Getting ready for a fight, I answered, double-checking the amount of dragon vein in my pouch. The explosive stones and my short sword were the only weapons at my disposal. It should be enough for an hour or two, in which time Alistair will have hopefully arrived. If she took any longer. Well, I would have to get craftier magically, turn into a dragon and fly us out of here. It's not dark out though, Camden grumbled dazedly. His eyes were barely open to see what time of day it was, but anyone who could see would know night was nearly on us. Standing only a few feet away from him, the darkness induced shivers along my flesh. My instincts told me to light a fire to stay warm, but I didn't want to draw any attention to us. My hope was that there was enough prey out tonight that the creatures wouldn't pay any mind to us, and we would be up in the sky before they noticed us. At least 100 feet above, we only really had to worry about harpies. Manticore wouldn't go near an adult dragon, even when she was by herself. I knew the last of the sun had dipped below the horizon when a thick velvet darkness folded over my eye. Licking the last of my sweat off my lips, I reached down for my hip where the trusty pouch of dragon vein rested. It was best to familiarize myself with its location now, rather than fumbling for it in a fight.
Soon my eyes would adjust and I could make out shadows, but unfortunately, if my enemy was slick, I wouldn't be able to see them until it was too late.
Cully Camden whispered. He seemed to have perked up a little amazed in my silence. What's going on? I told you it's nighttime. I'm standing guard. I can hear your teeth chattering. You're cold. Better cold than being eaten alive. I hissed, straining to hear anything but Camden's voice behind us. There was a possibility nothing was near us, and standing guard was pointless. And the only thing I should worry about was freezing to death, or something could be stalking us right now. And if I wanted us to survive, I had to be vigilant. Come here, Camden ordered. I can't stand watching you shiver like that.
I thought you, of all people, would understand how important my job is right now.
Can't. Unless you're well enough to help me in a fight, you stay there, and I'll stay here. If I can hear your teeth chattering, so can the goblins across the field. The exhausted nature of his tone caught my attention first. He was trying to act normal, undoubtedly, so I would give in to his demands, but then his words sunk in. You can hear goblins across the field. I can see them. You can't? No, I'm pretty blind right now. Stop talking so I can hear what's going on. I'll stop talking if you sit beside me and warm up. I would have never guessed he was a heaping pile of sweat and tremors an hour ago with that princely, authoritative, but slightly mischievous tone. You can see the goblin. I didn't know how he could see them, but if he could, then at least I would have some warning before they attack. I'll tell you if they get close, he promised. Relenting, I backed up until I hit the boulder, then slid down to the ground, my sword laying at my side, ready to be picked up at a moment's notice. It wasn't hard to tell where Camden was. His body was hot, the heat radiating off him like a medium-sized fire. He didn't have to put his arm over my shoulders to keep me warm, but there was something comforting about sitting in the dark in someone's arms, knowing that despite how alone I felt, I wasn't. However, I resisted the urge to snuggle into his side and wrap my arms around him. I doubted he had that in mind when he invited me over. How are you feeling? I asked him to distract myself awful. I honestly don't know how I'm awake right now. I'm so exhausted and everything bloody hurts. It's like growing pains exploded. If it's any consolation, I'm glad you're awake. I don't want to be alone right now. It was horribly selfish. Sleeping was probably the only escape he had from the pain. He found my hand in my lap in the darkness and squeezed.
That's why I'm fighting every compulsion I have to sleep.
Abruptly, his hand tore out of my grasp. He curled his knees to his chest, groaning like a wounded animal. Any other time, I would have felt more sympathetic, but he wasn't rolling agony quietly, and I was pretty sure a goblin could pick up on it. Cam, I hate to tell you this. I know you're hurting, but shut up. The goblins will hear you. Because the universe hated me, he cried out, throwing himself forward onto his hands and knees. He roared, sounding more like a manticore than a human, and heaved violently. If they hadn't heard him before, the goblins definitely heard him then. Sorry! In a last-ditch effort to conceal our position, I gripped my sword tight, then slammed the hilt down on his temple. He collapsed instantly. I dragged him back to the boulder, then stood over him, sword at the ready. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind against the grasses in the field. It was cool, sending a shudder up my spine, but oddly refreshing. And then an awful stench wafted into my nose. Seconds later, the scent became the sounds of various shrieks and screeches made of my nightmare. They had found us. Chapter 19, Happy Thanksgiving to all my Canadian readers. I'm grateful for my loving, supportive boyfriend, my amazing family, and all my fans. Elisa, I need you to hurry up. I grabbed a stone from my pouch and tossed it to the ground before me. The clearing filled with light from the fire. The inferno stretched high into the sky, licking the clouds looming ominously over me. The flames spread quickly through the grass, creating an unbreachable barrier standing between me and the cluster of goblins, scrambling up the small incline to it. No taller than my knees. Their little eyes glowed gold in the firelight. They shrieked at the sudden flash of light and jumped back. I used the moment to gather my senses and slow my heart rate. Now was not the time to panic at their best numbers. Now was not the time to think about anything. The fire would last at least 10 minutes. Hopefully the fight wouldn't last that long any longer, and I would be too tired to raise my sword. What happened to not thinking, focus, collapse, breathe, fight, live, survive, something I'd done all my life. After their moment of surprise disappeared, the goblins cried out in a hungry roar. They split up, running around either end of the fire for me. The first one had a spear. I knocked it aside with my sword and kicked its face in. Most of them used the weapons they were born with, teeth and claws. I managed to cut down the first few, but there were so many. While I was slashing, others leapt onto my legs and bit down. I flushed out the pain, grabbed them by their tiny heads, and pried them off like the oversized leeches they were. My blade, an extension of my body, sliced through them as I danced around the goblins, swiping and bashing. When they hit the ground, I stomped down, heads and chests crumbling beneath my feet. There could be as many of them as they could throw at me. I was not backing down. This was a fight I intended to win, no matter how ugly it got. And then before I knew it, the fire was simmering down into a gentle flame. It didn't matter, though. I sliced my blade across the last goblin's throat and was left standing in the middle of a circle of bodies. The only sound was the flicker of the dying fire in front of me, gasping for breath, stunned. I'd actually survived an attack by an entire swarm of goblins. I turned for Camden. He was still lying by the boulder, untouched by the swarm. Blood trickled down the side of his face, where I'd hid him aside. From that, he appeared to be sleeping peacefully. If the attack was any indicator as how the rest of my night was going to go, he could sleep all. He liked. As my adrenaline wore off, the sting of my wounds kicked in. My legs felt like I had stuck them in a river full of piranhas, but it was my ribs that hurt the most. The swift movements weren't exactly part of the no sparring rule Cadence had forced upon me, that on top of having half of Camden's weight on me for hours would most assuredly set back my recovery. Groaning, I slipped down the boulder beside Cam and held my rib. Even the tiniest of breath cut deep into my side. I stared up at the sky, wishing the stars were out so I could at least distract myself from the pain while I forced myself to breathe. The fire that had shimmered and the clouds above me fizzled out, shutting me in darkness once again. Except this time, I was alone. Hours of silence went by. At least it felt like hours. It was cold. The only thing stopping me from freezing to death was the intense heat of Camden's body. Breathing still hurt, but not as much now that I'd caught my breath. I opted out of lighting another fire for two reasons. One, to avoid detection from further monsters. Two, I didn't want to be reminded of carnage only a few feet away from me. I did what I had to do to survive, but it sure hadn't been pretty. And if I looked at one more caved-in skull, I was going to hurt. I fought with everything I had to resist sleep, but the day caught up with me and weighed heavily on my eyelid. My senses were alert enough that I felt like if I shut my eyes for a few moments, I would wake up if a monster approached. Or you'll sleep so heavily as you usually do that even a pissed off manticore can sneak up on you and kill you and cam it in your sleep. That thought was pretty much the only reason why I was awake at the moment. A faint roar sounded in the distance. My heart stopped. I'd recognize that call from anywhere. Putting a whole new meaning to the word alive, I shot to my feet and cut my mouth, Ellison. She called out again, closer. All I had was the sound of her voice to tell me where she was. It wasn't good enough after sitting alone in the dark for hours. I needed to see her. I threw a small piece of dragon vein down on the ground. The area around me lit up, and so did the 6 eyes of a chimera 10 feet away. The lion's head appeared to be drawn by the blood of the goblins and figured it was an easy snap. It hadn't known I was here until I'd stupidly called out to Elisir and let the ground. The snake head was just in the middle of swallowing a goblin whole when the lion bared its teeth at me, hungrily. Drool oozed out of its gills and pooled at its feet. Swallowing a thick lump in my throat, I peered down at my short sword, then back up to the three-headed creature. If I was lucky, I could cut the snake's head off before it bit me and injected me with its venom. Maybe I could dodge the goat's horns, but avoid the lion and its paws as well. I was good, but no one was that good. It stepped for me, El Azor, dove out of the sky, and tackled the chimera to the side. The massive beasts rolled out of the cone of light. I rushed after them, striking the ground once more with dragon vein. El Azor rose up high and bit a chunk out of the goat's throat. The snake threatened to sink its teeth into her leg. I ran at full speed and swung my blade down, cutting the head clean off. The chimera reared its back and kicked out at me. I hit the ground hard, coughing on the air forced out of my lungs. Hastily, I clambered to my feet and tossed the red stone into the air. Elsa lunged to swallow it. Her throat glowed as it slid down her esophagus. Seconds later, a brilliant red flame spewed out of her mouth and engulfed the chimera. It cried out, running into the field to put it out. I didn't care where it went as long as it was away from him. Beyond relieved, I rushed to the glorious green dragon and wrapped my arms around her neck. You are the bestest friend anyone could ask for. She curled her tail around me, ducking her head in a possessive hug. Her chest rumbled with purr. Camden groaned by the boulder. Despite her protests, I jumped out of her grasp and ran to his side. He had flipped himself onto his back and was holding his head. I gently swatted his hand out of the way so he wouldn't mess with his wound. In an instant, his hand was on my wrist, eyes burrowing into me. They glowed gold like the goblins has had in the fight.
Hey, I said softly, it's me, you're safe. Camelazar's here to take us home.
We're going to get you the help you need. His hand fell lax on his chest, eyes drifting shut. Recovery, my name was only a hoarse whisper on his lips before he completely passed out again. Elazar came to our side, her nostrils flared as she dipped her head down to sniff Cam. A soft rumble vibrated through her chest. It was a different pitch from her purr, higher and in her throat, like a crew. I'd heard her only make that noise once before when she was with Marka. The dragon nudged his side under his arm to wake him up. He's out cold. No, he's sick. We have to get him back to Plum. She nodded, then lowered herself down so I could get into the saddle. How did a saddle get on her?
I had been fully prepared to ride home bareback, which meant someone had put it on her.
If they knew she was coming to pick me up, they had to be on their way as well. There was no way my family would let me be out here by myself. Sure enough, 6 dragons came into view. What was left of the fire illuminated the colors the dragons bore, red, blues, greens, and yellows. Despite knowing they were friends, not foe, Elliser stood in front of us protectively, tail curling around us, while her wings flared to make her bigger. The dragons landed, forming a circle. One by one, my brothers dismounted and scanned the area for any threat. Dad jumped off Jordan's back and rushed straight to me. Instead of yelling at me for stupidly wandering the valley at night, even though I had no choice, he took one look at the pile of goblins, then pulled me into a tight hug. Are you all right, Cal? Despite the sting all over my body from his embrace, I nodded. The hug felt too good to ignore. Relief had washed over me when Elliser had arrived. Now, I was overwhelmed by the rush of emotions I'd buried all night. I cried silently into his shoulder, releasing all the fear and hopelessness of being alone in a large world filled with darkness and monsters. Everything was okay now. Cam and I had made it.
Holy shit, Giles exclaimed, walking around the pile of dismembered goblins.
Did you fight all of these, Cal? Dad's grip tightened on me at the thought of fighting all of them by myself. I did. I confirmed. By God's Kalei, Akaun called from the other side of his dragon, looking out into the field. Is that a chimera? I pulled myself out of Dad's embrace, sword at the ready. Is it coming back? No, it's dead. You killed the chimera too. Guys, I think we should stop teasing Kyle. Giles suggested. She'll fuck us up. Shut it, Casper snapped. Kalei safe, and that's all that mattered. He said it for Dad's benefit.
who was growing paler by the minute, even with the orange flame. "Where's Camden?" Talon asked, peering around the circle of dragons. I stepped out of his view. "He's sick." Carried him as far as I could until Elisir came, but night came sooner than I wanted. I shivered, not from the cold. Harry knelt beside him and felt his forehead. Wow, he's hot. He felt his pulse and frowned. He should be dead. What happened to him? Kala. I rushed to explain the events of today, starting with why we were only out here with one dragon, so no one would berate me for being an idiot. 2 dragons was always better than 1. Then I went on to tell them Cam could use fire magic without being bound. If they were confused, then they were even more surprised when I continued to tell them Marco attacked him. Talon straight up denied it ever being possible until I kindly reminded him that Marco was not with us for a reason. And then his fever started and he was in so much pain, I went on feeling more drained by the second. And I had to hit him to keep him quiet. The goblins were going to hear him.
They did. Anyway.
He's going to be mad at me when he wakes up. If he wakes up, the wobble in my voice betrayed me. Hopefully no one picked up on it. Harry put his arm around me, green-blue eyes, predominantly green in this lighting. They were solemn, sympathetic. Okay, hopefully no one else noticed. Looking at the rest of my brothers, it didn't. Inwardly cursing myself for not being able to keep it together, I jerked out of Harry's grasp and walked over to Elisir. "Let's go home already." The flight back was long. It felt longer than usual, dragging out endlessly, giving my mind plenty of time to wander and remind myself how useless I had been to Camden today. I wouldn't blame him for being angry with me. I would be if I were him, instead of comforting him and healing him. I dragged him across the valley and then proceeded to knock him unconscious when he cried out too loudly.
Yeah.
The epitome of bedside service. When we arrived in Plum, Casper carried Camden to the healing hut. It was a wonder anyone was in at this time of night. When the door opened, I wished I'd stayed home with my other brothers against Dad's wishes. Apparently, since I was his guide, I had to make sure he got all the proper care and attention he needed. Well, that definitely wasn't going to be a problem anymore. Amber, in all her silky black hair and long-legged glory, was holding the door open for us. Her golden eyes roamed over Casper, quickly deciding he wasn't worth it since we shared the same blood, then dropped her jaw when she saw Camden. "What have you done to him?" The accusation was pointed at me, but her eyes were fixed on the flush man on my brother's shoulder. "We'll explain later." Casper grunted. "Right now, I need to put him down. He's bloody, heavy." She sneered as she stepped aside to let us in. "Maybe you should work out more." "I'll work out plenty." "This guy is just heavy." I'm glad I wasn't the only one who noticed the insane, seemingly unnatural weight increase. Still wearing that sneer, Amber led us past a few occupied cots and pulled a curtain back to reveal a bed, definitely more comfortable than the one I'd been given a few nights ago.
Well, you're the prince. Of course he gets special treatment.
It was so easy to forget who he really was. None of the princes I grew up with acted like how I'd thought princes should behave, except for their gallantry. Camden had come the closest with his snobby stiffness when I first met him, but he wasn't remotely like that anymore. He was someone I liked spending time with, someone I could relate to, someone I could rely on. Not anymore. He's gonna hate you when he wakes up. Hello. Amber snapped her fingers in my face, jolting me away from my thoughts. Camden was bare-chested, sweat gleaming on his body as he breathed heavily. His eyes were squeezed, shut lips pressed tightly together. What happened to him? She was already laying cold, damp cloths on him, while all I could do was stare at the redness of his skin and the steam rolling off the cloth. Casper was gone. When had he left?
You don't know?
I don't know, I answered, not feeling like myself. I wasn't vulnerable in front of Amber. That only gave her an excuse to hurt me more. I was teaching him how to use fire magic. The next thing I knew, Marco was attacking him. I sent him away while I calmed him down. When I found him on the trail, he was keeled over in so much pain. He was sweating like he is now. He wasn't this hot, though. He looked like he might burn us if we touched him.
Ah!
How did he get this? She asked, too busy taking her job seriously for once to notice how frail I felt. She pointed the wound on his head. Huh? I hit him to shut him up. She paused, placing a fresh towel on his chest. Her hair slipped over her shoulder. In the next moment, she was tossing her long black locks back over her shoulder and glaring at me. You did what I knew you were stupid, but this is beyond that. Are you a caveman or something? You don't hit people to shut them up. God's no wonder he's nice to you. He pities your pathetic existence, and look where that got him. I hope he sees you're not worth it if he wakes up. You're only gonna get him hurt or killed if you haven't already done that. What was Grant thinking when he made you the princess god? Yeah. She continued muttering to herself about how stupid of an idea it was for me to guide anyone when I was too borscht to act like a decent human being. Meanwhile, she followed her teachings to lower Camden's temperature. Instead of defending myself, I let her words rattle through my head because she was right. I was as useless and boorish as they came. But it was one thing she particularly said that hit home if he wakes up. I'd been so sure if I brought him here, he'd be okay. But what if I was too late? The thought of him dying made me ill. I spun around and puked into the closest thing I could find a bed. You're disgusting. Get out of here, Amber barked, thrusting a finger for the door without looking back at me. Feeling absolutely miserable, I trudged out of the healing hut. A light mist coated the town, blurring out the torchlight leading my way home. I paid no mind to it, feeling as though I was wandering hopelessly. I'd gone so numb I hadn't realized I was cold until Casper draped his jacket over me. I hadn't even noticed he'd been walking by my side the entire time. Is he dead? He asked carefully. Not yet, I murmured. I don't think Amber can do anything for him, though. I'm sorry, Kyle, he whispered, trying to take my hand, but I recoiled away from his touch. I didn't deserve to be consoled. Hey, it's not your fault. It's entirely my fault. He grabbed my arm and yanked me to a stop. His blue eyes were nearly silver. In the torchlight, he looked as fierce as any dragon. Look, we don't know why this is happening to him. It's not normal. Magic is at play here. Our ancestors kept extensive records on the Ackers while they were here. Maybe it's a hereditary thing. If we find out what's wrong, we can fix it. Don't give up. But Amber's a bitch and only knows how to heal with herbs and a few spells. We're Dricinos. It's our duty to protect the dragon princes while they're in training. We're going to do our job. Could not take tonight to do what you need to do. But when you wake up, I want to see my tenacious little sister find a way to save her prince. I doubted what I could do to save him, but he was right. I couldn't give up on Camden, no matter what he may think of me when he woke up. I'd deal with him once we got there, but until then, I'd sworn an oath to him, and I would do what I could to make sure he saw his family again. You always feel the need to make big speeches, don't you? I teased him. A grin split Casper's face. It's what big brothers are for. There's a flaw in your plan, though. Why wait until morning when we could start, when we get it? Sleeping was for people who had time for it. We didn't know how much time Camden had left by the looks of his condition. It couldn't be too much longer. Casper bumped my shoulder playfully, beaming with pride. Let's get going. When we arrived home, Talon and Giles were sprawled on the couch, a book open in their lap. Their mouths were wide open, a trickle of drool slipping out of the corner of their lip. Cadden and Harry were hunched over on the table, a pile of books walling them off from each other.
Yeah.
Dad sat in the armchair, legs stretched out to catch the fire's warm embrace. But when we came in, he stood up, collecting a few books from the table. He handed one each to us. Get to work, you two. One of these diaries will save Prince Camden. How can you be so sure? I asked, brushing a thick layer of dust off my hardcover. His symptoms are very similar to something that happened to one of his ancestors. Unfortunately, with my old age, I can't remember what these symptoms mean or what we can do to help him. Start reading. By the look on Casper's face, I knew he was thinking the same thing. We had so many books about our ancestors and how they taught the dragon princes of their time. How come Dad didn't make us read them any sooner? Though, in all honesty, we weren't exactly the most book-ready family. We'd much rather be outside and learn with our hands than through a book. Sighing, I found a perch by a window and opened up the diary. It belonged to my great-great-great-grandfather, Joseph Dricino. According to his loggings, he had a wife and 2 sons. He was the only dragon tamer in the village, back when the village was small and the demand for dragons was low. He had trained 2 dragon princes already, and he was only 22. The third and final Acker he would guide would become of age next year, but Plum had already started preening up for his arrival, as it always did when a prince came to our humble village. I bit my lip to hold back a laugh. Great, whatever grandfather Joseph would be disappointed by Plum's lack of preening now. And Acker coming to town meant we got to party more than anything. It wasn't as big a deal as it was for the small towns. I skipped a year ahead. Reading about his life leading up to Prince Archibald's arrival seemed pointless and a waste of time as interesting. I'm sure his life was as the only dragon tamer in the village. I got to the page where he'd just had a fine dinner with the Acker family. However, he was more excited about the pretty servants tidying up after him, and even more excited to attend the ball to celebrate Prince Archibald's return anew as a dragon prince. He'd only caught a small whiff of the beautiful courtiers who would attend. He was eager to dance with them and feel their lovely ample bodies against him. I skipped a few pages ahead, suddenly less interested in the wise words my ancestor had written down. It was this as well. I went a few pages ahead. He'd only just finished talking about the fine women of Hysteria. His journey home with the prince wasn't nearly as exciting as mine.
They arrived before sundown and performed the ceremony.
Yardy yard. They spent the first 2 weeks looking for his dragon partner so they could start training. In the 3rd week, Joseph was beginning to worry because it appeared none of the dragons liked him. A few tried to kill him. Okay, now my interest was piqued. Joseph hadn't seen anything like it before. The previous 2 princes he'd guided didn't have this much trouble finding a dragon, let alone the dragons wanting to kill them. It wasn't to any fault of Archibald. He was a kind, passionate man who only wanted to protect his people like his brothers before him. He tried to hide it, but Joseph knew the prince's patience was wearing thin. Instead of going out to find a dragon, Joseph thought to take him to the mine. It would be a welcome distraction. They could blow stuff up and talk about the things Archibald could do once he did find a dragon. It appeared to help with the prince's frustration, but then it happened. Archibald accidentally broke a large piece of dragon vein too early. Since he wasn't bound to a dragon yet, it should have blown him and Joseph to smithereens. But it didn't. They walked away unscathed because Archibald used fire magic without dragons. It took days for them to come out of the shock. What did it mean? Was the Acker line evolving? Their magic was so potent. Now they didn't need a dragon partner to lend them their power. One thing was for certain, Joseph had never seen or heard of the kind of power Archibald possessed. He was a complete natural with the flames he controlled, unlike his brothers who took a few weeks to physically get used to using the magic in their blood. And then things took a turn for the worse. Archibald got sick. Really sick. Joseph was at a loss. His skin burned to the touch. Something was inside him. Joseph saw it with his own eyes.
Shirtless, back exposed to Joseph, something moved beneath his muscles from his shoulders to his lower back, threatening to burst free.
Except it didn't. Whatever it wasn't strong enough to break through his skin.
It was a sight that made the healer faint on the spot. Archibald was in so much pain that Joseph was tempted to end his life out of mercy. The healers couldn't do anything for him. They didn't know what was wrong.
They tried to extract the thing under his skin, but during the sickness, his skin had become too thick for any blade to slice through. They were helpless to save him.
As the weeks of agony went on, he grew thinner, unable to eat and sleep. Then one day, his body couldn't take it anymore. Joseph took the prince's body home to his family to have a proper royal burial. They held no grudges against him. Apparently, this happened every few generations. The youngest son would get terribly, terribly sick and die. They suspected it was the magic in their blood not mixing well with their body at the height of their maturity. I stopped reading, slamming the book. Shut the sun had risen and shone through the window I sat at. It was supposed to fill my body with warmth, but I felt colder than I had last night. My brothers and father looked up from their books at the sound of my movement.
Dad was on his feet, and the next second in gripping my shoulder. Did you find anything?
Kyle. Yeah, Prince Camden is gonna die. The video is about to end. The adventure has just begun.
Don't go away. Subscribe to our channel, and next time we'll fly even higher.